Hey guys, what's up? This is Alex Duque. Welcome back to another tutorial. This is sort of like a continuation on the one that I had done where I discussed mapping the caustics into or mapping texture into the color or the intensity of a light to achieve an effect. Now I opened up this little scene which is called a caustic cheat, color lights, and let me go ahead and make a render here of my camera 1. And this is the effect that we're getting in this case. Now this is cheated. This is, again, it's not real caustics, and there's no glow illumination or final gather or anything. It's just a light source back there, that's a spotlight, and that one, it has mapped a texture onto it, which is this same texture, and that would cause this, and it has ray trace shadows to give this shadow, except that this guy doesn't have ray trace shadows, so that it doesn't cast shadows, so you don't see the actual shadows there. And then I have this guy, which is just giving a little bit of an ambience feel there, so that it looks like the light is bouncing off of the teapot back into the wall, just to give it a little bit of feel. But let's actually go ahead and do it. So we're gonna delete those two objects here, and I'm going to tell this guy to cast shadow. So we're sort of like back at default here. So if I make a render, then it's going to look like that. Yay! Isn't that exciting? It's a very simple looking render. Now, as far as the materials, as you know, I actually mapped this texture file onto the incandescence, and that is what allows that to look like if it's like a light source, like if it had a bright light behind it. So if I map it into the incandescence, then then that is going to look like that. Alright. Now you can always use a surface shader to give you that same effect, but I'm keeping it simple with Lambert's for this tutorials without having to go into any specialty shaders. Alright, so you got a basic setup there, and yeah, that's great, but where's the shadows? So if we go and make ourselves a spotlight, and the reason again why I'm using a spotlight is because I can explain the mapping of it with a lot less explanation than if I had a point or an area or even a directional. So once you put a spotlight somewhere and you shine down and you make a render, then you're gonna see your source. And in this case, what we're gonna tell this little spotlight is not to have that many or that big of a cone. So I'm gonna make that cone angle maybe like 10. I don't have to render to know. Okay, a little bit too small. I'm gonna make it 20. Okay, 25. There we go. So it's big enough that it goes into the edge of the ceiling. And remember what I was talking about with the mapping. So I know that these values will change, but I'm keeping it to those values so that you can see what's going to happen. All right. So once you have your spotlight, last time we had mapped into the intensity. Now this time, let's go in the color and map a file there. And we're going to map our little stained glass picture there. And we're going to make ourselves a render. Right now there's no shadows or anything. Now when we map that, there's a whole bunch of things that you can see. First is, okay, look at this edges and that edge, and look at the edge here. And you can actually see the edge there as well. I'm going to get close so you can see that edge and this edge, which are happening right on the edge of the spotlight. Alright? So that's important to understand. I'm actually going to, I don't want you to get confused, so I'm going to disconnect the intensity value, the incandescence value of that window. So you're not thinking, oh, that's what it's causing this. Alright, there we go. So right now it's only a light source. The edge of the cone right there, the edge of the cone right there. If you make your cone even smaller, I'm going to make it 10. And I'm going to delete a whole bunch of images and make a render here. So you can see what I'm talking about. The edge of the circle and the edge of the circle and the edge of the circle and the edge of the circle. That is the placement of the texture itself. Okay? So that's important. Now, in this case, you would say, oh yeah, that works. But if you actually see the actual texture, not the one that's connected to the light source. Let me organize this. Not the one that's connected to the light source, but the one that should be connected to the incandescence value. Then you'll see that there's a discrepancy here. In order for you to cheat something, you need to, stay constant. And I don't know if you can see what's going on here, but I'm gonna give you a second to look at it and tell me what's wrong. Aside from a lot of things. Okay, what's the main thing that's wrong here is that this top area here, should be coming down like that, right? It's actually here on the bottom, so the bottom texture is flipped. We need to start by flipping this. That's when the whole mapping idea begins to get complicated. So you have 2D textures, and 2D textures have a little thing called place 2D texture node. That place 2D texture node has coverage, translate, rotate, repeat UV, offset, rotate UV, noise UV. It's a whole bunch of attributes. The coverage is sort of like the size of the actual texture itself. If the coverage was, let's say, 0.5 by 0.5, that's UMV value, so it's half of the actual size, then you'll see what's happening there. And you can see that gray color that's happening out there. That is not in the place 2D node, but in the actual file texture. If you go to color balance, that default color, guess what that's for? So if you make it red, then that's going to be red. If you make it black, then that's going to be black. And in this case, we actually wanted black because since this is supposed to be light, then that's supposed to be shadow. So that means that there's no light. And right now, light's only happening from there. Now if we make a render, we got a placement that's smaller, but at the same time, you can see it's only here in this area, but at the same time, it's still flipped, it's still upside down. So what we need to do is we need to rotate our frame. We can rotate it 180 degrees, and now it's behind that area. Let's make that coverage back to 1. So now you can see that we got the yellow part with the yellow part, and the blue part with the blue part. However, if you pay closer attention, I hope you do, you'll see that there's still something off here. Can you tell what it is? If you look at this little flower here, it does like this. But if we look at it here, it's doing like this. So it's actually flipped. It's going the wrong direction. We also need to fix that. That's back in that 2D placement node. So with that 2D placement node, you have these two values, repeat U and repeat V. If you change, I believe in this case would be the repeat U to -1, then you're going to flip your image horizontally. Ah, there we go. So now it's making sense. Okay, this guy would be over here. This tulip or whatever that flower is over here. That guy is over there. So now, as far as placement goes, it's a lot better. I know we still don't have any shadows here, but we'll get into the shadows part later. So we're just discussing one topic at a time. So we got the right placement. Now it's a matter of getting rid of that little circle there. And the question would be, well, how do we get rid of the circle? Well, the way that the mapping here happens, if you look through selective, you select your spotlight and you look through selective, you'll see how this is mapping, and you can see where it's coming from, and you can see how retarded my placement is, because you know this little cone should be on that area, on that little window area. So I'm just going to change my placement here until it actually makes a little bit more sense. Maybe something like that. Even a little bit further back. I'll make it further like that, so that that face, that window, is actually inside of the cone. See how that window is inside of the cone angle? So that's where we want to start with. Now if we make our render again, let me just go back to camera 1 here, make a render again, and we'll see the placement and the stretching of the texture. That's a little bit nicer here in this case. So yeah, great, groovy doovy, except that we're still getting, well, as far as placement, now it's better placed, but we are still getting confused here with the circle of our cone angle. Now, you may say, well, if I change my penumbra to soften it up, let's say 10, then everything's going to be fixed. Not really, because now, see, the placement is happening based on that penumbra angle on the outermost edge, and then it's repeating itself over and over and over and over and over. It's repeating itself here, then there. So that won't really do much, right? Well, so what do? Well, we got some options here. One of them, which is if you select your light and you open up you look through selected and you press T, you'll see these little boxes here, this little grid. That grid is I have no idea what it's called. I just know what it does. Actually, I do know. It's just I forget names. Let me just find out. Barn doors. There we go. So those are called barn doors. So if you actually, you can do this manually. If you activate barn doors and then change the numbers manually or sliders, then you can see how those barn doors are moving. But that might get a little bit complicated. So you can actually just click and move them. So I'm just going to move them until they're in the correct place. Like so. Now I might want to get a little bit more exact, and in order for me to do that I would have to actually rotate my light. Oops, how did I put it there? Let me just rotate it, there we go. That's a little bit better there. I know, not exact, but fine, good enough. Okay, so those barn doors, if you move them, then they're gonna be able to cut up your scene or your lighting. Right now, actually, if I do it, it's not gonna work because I haven't activated them. You need to activate them so that they actually do something, so you need to check it. Once it's checked, and you go ahead and make a render, then those will theoretically cut off the light, and they're not. That's what I thought. Okay, so yeah, they're not cutting off the light, but that's fine because I still was gonna do this some other way. So that brings me up to the next part. Yeah, I know, it's not a perfect science. Which is, how the hell do you get rid of that? Well, if you actually look at the excuse me, if you actually look at the texture itself and you go into the Place 2D texture, you got these two little checked options, wrap U and wrap V. What those things are doing is that they're telling the texture to wrap horizontally and vertically. Now in this case, it's still gonna wrap horizontally and vertically, I believe, just because of the placement of the actual light source. Oh no, there you go. So yeah, it's not. Ha. See, I love it when things go right or wrong. That was still my point. So those guys are going to get rid of that. So that way there is no wrapping around and you only get one, the main one. Now that's good and all, but one thing that's happening here is the size of this is a lot bigger than the size of the window. And not only that, but it's also kind of like there. Now yeah, there is a quick way for adjusting that, which would be just, you know, selecting your spotlight and making the angle a little bit smaller. Like if I made the angle of the spotlight cone angle, let's say 5, number angle 5. Keep this image in render. Then the placement is going to be a lot smaller. So you have that, and now you have this. But maybe that's not the way you want to do it. Maybe what you want is, you know, because of shadows or something, whatever, you don't want it to be so small. Maybe you want it to be big, say 10 and 10. But you still want to have a short shadow, a small shadow there, or a small gobo there. Well, what you can do here is change the placement of the actual texture. And actually, this one's kind of cool because you can write a script to do this. If you know about the UV layout, you should know that the UV window, just look through my camera one here, and open up the UV texture window. Alright, so look at the UV texture window, then you have this little weird looking thing that is an actual, it's like a Cartesian plane. I don't know how you say that in English, but I hope I got it right. It's like a Cartesian plane. I don't know if you ever had to do that math exercise where you had 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and if you had like, you know, like let's say 1 and 1, and then you had 2 and 1, and then you had 3 and I don't know 2. Then you would say, okay, so 1 and 1. That would be the point right there. 2 and 1, 2 and 1. That would be 1. That would be the point right there. 3 and 2. So that would be the point right there. And you know, you had a little line and whatever. So I don't know if you remember that thing. If you don't, then you can study up on it and remember a little bit of math. So why am I talking about this? Well, because this UV texture window is kind of like the same idea. You have a value that goes from 0 to 1 and from 0 to 1. So 0, 0 would be here and 1 would be there. And that's important because that is how you can determine the placement of textures. You have these two values, coverage and translate frame. This is U, this is V, this is 0, this is U, and this is V. So that means that the coverage of this texture is 1 and 1, and its translation is 0 and 0. Now, one thing extra about this is the fact that it repeats itself. So, like if I did coverage 0 and 0, I'm sorry, if I did translate frame 1 and 1, and I mapped this wrap, then I would actually see it rotate, wrap around. So translate frame 0.5, 0.5, you can see what's happening there. So it's wrapping around. Now this is interesting because if I wanted to, let's say, make this texture half of the size, and I wanted it to be smack in the middle, I would say, well, coverage would be half of it. So 0.5 and 0.5. There we go, half of it. But then how many units would I have to translate it in the U and in the V so that it would actually be here in the center? So you might say, oh well, it would be zero point 0.5 and zero point 0.5. So well, actually, that wouldn't be it, because the placement is based on the origin. It's based on that little guy. So that would mean that you would have to, instead of doing that, you would have to do 0.25 and 0.25, which is sort of like the half distance. So from here to here, there's 0.25, and from here to here, there's 0.25. 0.25 plus 0.25 equals 5, and 0.25 plus 0.25 equals 5. Therefore, that's your placement. So it's actually here, but that would mean that the center would be right smack in the center. And and then if you say, well, what if I wanted my coverage to be 0.25 and 0.25? Then my translate would have to be, I have no freaking clue, right? That's a little equation, and what it is you can consider the translate frame to be 0.5 minus coverage divided by 2. That would be the way that you can figure out the placement of this. So that would be 0.5 minus 0.25 divided by 2. So why don't we open the calculator here? There's a little Maya calculator. So 0.25 divided by 2, 0.125 minus 0.5, 0.35. So if I put here 0.375, 0.375, then smack in the middle. Okay, so that's a little equation, but opening up the calculator every time, that is kind of annoying, especially if you're going to be changing this constantly. You can actually write scripts here as well. If you right click here and you create a new expression, then you look at the values and you'll see you got coverage U and coverage V, translate frame U and translate frame V. Translate frame U, V. So it's just the naming here. So you can say, well, translate frame U, copy and paste, equals, what was it? 0.5 minus place 2D texture 4 coverage U, and if you look here you'll find the coverage U, so coverage U divided by 2, and copy and paste, just change the U's to the V's here, create, and you got yourself an expression there. So now I can say, well, coverage 1 and 1, voila, coverage 0.2 and 0.2, voila, coverage 0.777775 by 0.777775. Isn't that awesome? So that way you don't have to make those divisions yourself. You let the software do the thinking for you, which is, I think, awesome. So anyway, part of the story of that little script is that you can, I want to introduce that because that way you can change your values without having to worry about the rest. Let me just take up the wrap and the wrap there. So if I do the coverage 0.1 and 0.1, then we have a really small guy, and if I make it 0.5 and 0.5, then we get a big guy. There's no wrapping, so that guy won't be wrapping around every time. And there we go. So now it's a matter of placing it wherever you want. So now I can actually select my light source here, panels perspective, look through selected. Why not? I'm gonna get really close up here so that I get more stretching on my shadow. Change this guy. Although changing this doesn't really do anything because that's off, but whatever. Perspective. Make myself another render. And change the placement down. Well, actually, let me look through that because I probably placed it wrong. Camera 1, look through selected. Okay, so that's this. Just gonna get a little bit. Actually, I'm gonna get closer, but change the tone angle to, I don't know, 20, 30, 20, 25. Yeah, 25 is big enough. Chin Chin Chan. So that's the placement of this. And you can always rotate it so it's a little bit more straight. Now this is going to be mapped kind of like from there. Yeah, just about. So now I'm getting that, and if I want to make my texture a little bit bigger, then I'm just going to change the placement to 0.75 and 0.75 so it's bigger. There we go. Okay, so that takes care of that, except we don't have the shadows. And if I activate ray trace shadows on this little guy, then I'll be doing something that would work halfway through. So if you use ray trace shadows, then your object there is going to cast shadows, and because there's no transparency map there, then you're not gonna see anything. So you need to tell that object not to cast any shadows, because we're cheating casting of the shadows of that object. So there we go. Now it doesn't cast shadows, so the only thing that casts shadows is our teapot. There it's casting its shadows. And if you want to give it a little bit of a fill, let me look back to camera 1 here. If you want to give it a little bit of a fill, then you can always make yourself a little area light, maybe a little bit bigger, whatever. Play with it, maybe play with the colors of it, so that it's a little bit more naturalistic. Maybe intensity is going to be too high, but yeah, way too high. So I'm just going to get 0.1 there. Still too high. 0.02 or 0.03 maybe. There we go. So now I got a little bit of color there. And guess what I can map here? I can map myself a ramp, and that ramp can have the color of the base be that color, and the color of the top be that color. Huh, isn't that cool? I'm gonna darken it up a little bit. Voila. I'm gonna make this really sharp. See if we're actually able to show you the mapping. I'm gonna intensify the light so you can really see it. 0.1. Yay! See, it's mapping. So of course I don't need it to be so sharp. I was just doing it to show you. Go back and soften this up like that, and of course take the light's intensity values lower. So you get a softer shading there. And you can see some of the bounce up there, some of the bounce under here, which is different than there. And it's cheated, and voila. Alright, so I hope that tutorial wasn't too complicated, or too long, or too boring. I do apologize for any mess ups that I had, but you need to hiccup here and there. That's why I like this like live. That way I can screw up and solve it, because that's a lot of what animation is about. It's about screwing it up and then fixing it. So anyway, that pretty much takes care of the second way to cheat light, which is with mapping, mapping color into the light sources. And I hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and I'll see you next time. Oh yeah, actually there's one more thing I didn't talk about. Just gonna show you here really quick. This is really sharp, and sometimes you want to soften it up. If you select the file, if you pre-filter, that's not gonna do anything. You actually need to go down into effects, and you have filter values. Make it 5. Hoping I make 10, so it really filters. And I'm gonna make that render there. Yeah, see? So now it's filtered. Yay! All right, guys. So only thing is that that's not really filtered, but there's really no way that I know of to fix that except by giving your light some penumbra so that it softens up there. Yeah, because that's not gonna do that either. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and I'll see you next time with the actual caustics version. All right. So till next time. Bye bye.